Usually when the main character gets their head chopped off, it's pretty much the end of the story, but this being a light novel, well, this is just where the story begins. Hello everybody and welcome to this light novel review. I'm Justus R. Stone and my channel's all about light novels, reviews like this, as well as news, and it's the home of the Light Novel Podcast. So if you love light novels or you're just starting to get interested in them, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss any of my future light novel content. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing volume number 1 of Tearmoon Empire. This one is written by Nozomu Mochitsuki. It has illustrations by Gilse. This one is released officially in English by J Novel Club, and it has a translation done by David Teng. If you'd like to pick up your own copy of this one, I've got links in the description down below. And make sure you stay until the end of the video. I'm going to recommend a couple of other titles that, if you like this one or this one sounds interesting to you, you might also want to check out. Tearmoon Empire is the tale of Mia Luna Tearmoon, the princess of the Tearmoon Empire. As the novel begins, Mia is being led to the guillotine. After spending 3 years in a dungeon, the citizens of her nation that have risen up in revolt after famine and warfare and, well, pretty much all the typical things that happen to empires when they fall apart, have had enough with her and, they're done, so they chop off her head at the guillotine. End of story? Well, of course not. It's a light novel. So, of course, Mia wakes up, and instead of being 20 years old and, just having lost her head, she's actually now 12 years old, and her head is very much still attached. Naturally, her inclination is to think that this is all just a silly, horrible dream. However, she finds a diary lying next to her, the very diary that she has been keeping all of her thoughts and events written in, covered in the blood of her head, as well, I guess her neck technically, as it was separated by the guillotine, and it's filled with all of the events that would happen over the next 8 years, which kind of makes her realize that maybe, just maybe, this is not a dream that she just had, that in fact she has lived an alternate timeline, and now if she doesn't want to lose her head again, she's got to figure out a way to fix things before they all go wrong. Tearmoon Empire is one of those light novels that actually is really excellent, mainly because it works on several different levels. First of all, we have the comedic level. Mia is I'll talk in more detail about Mia a little bit later, but in general, she is one of those characters who is a bit clueless, a little self-absorbed, and because she is trying to avoid her bad end, and because she has knowledge of some of the things that are going to be wrong with the Empire, she often comes up as being a much different person than what everybody expects. And so, often when she is making decisions that are very self-serving, others see them as being incredibly altruistic. And so there are often the whole comedy of misunderstandings and people thinking one thing when reality is not anywhere near that. In a lot of ways, the narrator of this book goes a long way to make those things work, because the narrator tells this in a very sort of fairy tale-esque way, but has absolutely zero interest in giving into any kind of fluffy BS. The narrator is just going to tell you like it is. They're going to say, Mia just wasn't that smart, and neither was this person that she was talking to, because neither one of them figured out that they were misunderstanding, and so forth. But the book isn't just a comedy. The book also does take a look at some very serious real-world type problems. One of the things that sets this world apart from a ton of other light novels that are somewhat similar is the fact there's no magic in this world, at least not in the first volume, and I can't really imagine it's going to be any different. But other than Mia's resurrection or going back in time or however you want to call it, no one has magical abilities. This is strictly set in a world very similar to our own world at around the time of the French Revolution. I would say that technology-wise it's maybe a little bit further back than that, but it is definitely similar. There are a lot of callbacks to that era. In fact, we could say that Mia herself is somewhat of an insert for Marie Antoinette. This means that this book actually has aspects of kingdom building to it. It does have a commentary a little bit on the sort of socioeconomic situation that can happen when you have such huge disparity between those who are rich and those who are poor. It gets into the idea that a lot of the ills of this kingdom, the Tearmoon Empire, are caused not just by the greed and the complete opulence and ignorance of the ruling and nobility class, but also the fact that even at sort of the middle class level, there is this disdain for certain things that help keep a country going. People look down on farmers. They look down on people that do the jobs that keep the kingdom running and keep the kingdom fed. And because of that, a lot of people don't do those jobs, which means the kingdom is then en route for a famine, which of course is one of the things that ends up happening. And that's not a spoiler. You're told all this right in the beginning that this is why Mia's losing her head. So it works a little bit on those kind of levels as well. This sort of kingdom building in which Mia has to figure out new ways of doing things in order to keep the kingdom going, as well as making commentary on things about the socioeconomic situation that's going on in this country. But it does it in a way that is not sort of like a hit you over the head. Certainly it feels timely given the things going on in our world, but it isn't preachy about it. And on top of all of that, we have sort of this school life element. A good chunk of this book actually involves Mia going away to school. And it involves her meeting characters that will eventually become leaders of the revolution that results in her losing the empire and losing her head. So you can just imagine all of the conflicting emotions that she has in regards to that. But we get some school life elements, and we also even get some kind of charming, like, budding romance moments. So like I said, this book has a whole lot of different stuff to it, and it works really well in most of those aspects. Now, of course, all of this would be meaningless if we didn't give a crap about Mia as a main character. And that is the one thing that I have to say I really love about this book. Mia is a very well fleshed out character. And she's a character that you become invested in her growth because you see her growth. Mia's not a horrible person. She's not a despot. In fact, even the narrator, who frankly can be quite hard on Mia in their analysis of how she behaves, even the narrator says she was never a horrible person. She was never a despot. She was never somebody to pull people in and just kill people on a whim. The thing with Mia was that she was spoiled and she was clueless about what was going on around her, and she just didn't care about anybody else. She was incredibly selfish and self-centered. And so when she comes to this realization that she needs to change things, she's also filled with all these memories of having spent 3 years in a dungeon and how she was treated in that dungeon. And she realizes that this was how she treated a lot of people around her that she saw as being beneath her. And so we see this character who already has had some realizations. But as we see her doing good things, and yes, in a lot of cases, these good things are incredibly self-serving. Her idea behind doing them is in order to help herself. It's not because she's being incredibly altruistic. But in a lot of ways, I liked that because it seemed more believable. Sometimes you have these kind of books and it's like the character just goes from all of a sudden being this self-centered, selfish person to all of a sudden, Florence Nightingale, like I'm just doing everything for everybody, for the people. And it just doesn't ring true. And that's the thing with Mia, is that we're seeing her learn. We're seeing her grow. We're seeing that as she initially starts doing things for her own selfish purposes, she eventually starts doing things because she realizes that it feels good to do those things. Or she's just doing things because she's starting to learn a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing how the world works. And I really appreciated that character growth, and I really appreciated that it wasn't like we just cast off everything that was wrong about Mia as a person. She is learning to deal with those things. And even though Mia is not like, a genius, she isn't stupid either. There are points in the book where she connects the dots that something that has happened is actually something she can use to the benefit of the Empire and therefore saving her own neck. She also makes decisions that aren't as, say, ludicrous as, Katerina in My Next Life as a Villainess, pocket snake to scare the prince. Wow, that sounded really bad. Anyway, yeah. But anyway, the things that she comes up with are sensible. Like, for instance, she decides that she's going to learn to ride a horse because it's faster to ride a horse. You can get away faster from people. And this is absolutely true. One of the first people that she decides to make contact with at the school is a boy named Abel, who is the second crown prince of a sort of middle-sized kingdom that is some distance from Tearmoon. However, they are known for their strong military. And so she figures if she befriends this boy, that it is a place where she can escape and they have the military might to protect her. Now, what's really nice about all of this is that eventually, even though she seems that she's initially making contact with Abel and developing a friendship with him as a way of using him as a backup plan, which, she is, but as you go along, you start seeing the development of a real friendship and even this sort of very charming kind of romance starting between the two. And Abel himself has a character journey. This is one of the things that I like about the narrator, is that the narrator will talk about events that happened in the alternate timeline. And so they talk about how Abel turned out before, and now they're showing you how Abel is changing because of Mia's influence. Because of not even just her influence, but just because she's showing interest in him, supporting him in a way, and recognizing him as a person in a way that he has not had happen before. We also see this happening with her Maiden Waiting, Anne, who's a commoner. Now, in the alternate timeline, Anne was one of the only people who still treated Mia with respect, who would come to her when she was in the dungeon to feed her, to help bathe her, to try and help her maintain some dignity. And so when she meets Anne in this timeline, she immediately decides to make Anne her maid in waiting, to reward her for her loyalty, and because she knows that this is somebody that she can trust. What I love about this book and what works for this book so well, and again, it's one of those sort of multi-level things, it doesn't just show that Mia is elevating Anne for the right reasons and rewarding Anne for good and, pure intentions. But because she does that, a lot of good things start happening for Mia. Because Anne is a good person. And Anne, thinking that Mia is also a good person, acts in a way that reflects incredibly positively on Mia. And in a lot of situations, Anne makes decisions that work for Mia's benefit, even though Mia has nothing to do with that decision. I really enjoyed that aspect of this book, that we have these secondary characters getting fleshed out, that they grow as people, but that we're also shown that because of this person showing interest in the right people, it is benefiting them too. It does show that there's sort of a balance, right? That, when people are lifted up, they can do good things, and those good things can actually benefit the person who lifted them. It creates this symbiotic relationship between the people that I really enjoyed, and I was just as invested every time that Anne was center stage, or every time that Abel was center stage. I enjoyed those parts of the book just as much as I enjoyed all of the times that we were with Mia. Now, there is a larger cast of other secondary characters, and again, I found that I enjoyed all of those characters and that they all had quirks and personalities that deepened the book as opposed to just being window dressing. Overall, Tearmoon Empire is just a phenomenal book. It works on so many different levels, it has a ton of enjoyable characters, and the narration, I agree with Sean Gaffney, his statement that the narrator can often be a little too hard on Mia, which he thought is a little bit of a distraction in the book. Although that is true, overall, I thought that the narration really worked. I thought that it was incredibly readable. To that, I will give some props to the translator, obviously, and the editor on this one. But overall, it just had that really sort of fairy tale feel to it. And the narrator being this sort of third-person omnipotent narrator that could contrast between the old timeline and the new timeline, who could point out the, like I said, funny moments when there's these ludicrous misunderstandings. It worked really, really well. And even the sort of more socioeconomic type commentaries never felt like they were beating you over the head. It never felt like it was there just to try and make a point. It was there because it belonged in this world. It was there because you could see how this world was building up to those things. And so overall, this is just a really great package. A good story, great characters, some decent world building, and it's got some sort of meatier topics in there if you really want to sort of sink your teeth into it. Although I will admit it doesn't go quite as deep on this volume as it could. I don't know if that will change as the series goes on. So yeah, overall, Tearmoon Empire, highly recommend it. Probably one of my favorite light novels that I have read in some time, and definitely a series that I want to try and make room for, that I can read more as it comes out. In this video, I want to say a special thanks to Kyle Block, Drone205, Jonathan McCabe, and VixLab.com for their support on Patreon, as well as the support of all of my patrons who help to keep this channel running, help to support the Light Novel Podcast, and who also help to support all of my other online ventures, including EnglishLightNovels.com, OriginalEnglishLightNovels.com, and the work in progress of the new light novel database. Now, if this book sounds like something you'd like to check out, there's a couple of other series that you might want to consider, especially depending on what part of this series most appeals to you. Obviously, if you're really into the whole comedy thing, I've already mentioned it, but My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom. This one, of course, has the same sort of setup, the idea that a girl finds herself in the villainous role, although in this case it's an isekai, not a time travel thing. And it is, of course, incredibly charming and very funny. I've already reviewed the first 2 volumes on this channel, as well as it recently having had an anime. So if you're looking at the comedy aspect, and that's something you're looking for, definitely this is one to recommend. Now let's say you want a little bit more in the romance side of things. You want a story that's a little bit more straighter-laced, a little bit more serious, but still has those aspects of a female character trying to escape a bad fate. Well, then this could be a series to check out. I Refuse to Be Your Enemy. I haven't had a chance to read this one myself, but I have seen a couple of other reviewers who have spoken positively about it and have mentioned that it is a little bit more of a serious take on things, but certainly has more aspect and focus on the romance side of this type of tale. And then finally, if you're looking for something that's a lot more kingdom building with much, much more intense politics and sort of political maneuvering and backstabbing and backroom deals and double crosses and all that kind of stuff, you might want to check out How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom. This series has been going on for quite some time. The 12th volume is being released by J Novel Club this month. So that, again, it's a series that if you are looking a lot more for that sort of world building aspect, that kingdom building, that might be a series that would be up your alley. So those are a couple of recommendations of series that you could check out if you like Tearmoon Empire, or just even like the sound of Tearmoon Empire. And I do hope you check this one out. Like I said, probably one of my favorite reads in quite some time. In fact, I like this one so much that I decided that for my next read, I was going to keep on with this whole idea of girls finding themselves in the role of the villainess who are trying to avoid a bad end. And so my next review is going to be volume number 1 of Deathbound Duke's Daughter. It's another Jave novel club, a tale about a girl who realizes she is now in an otome game as a villainess. However, this one, again, a little bit of a different feel to it. I'll be talking about that in my next video. Until then, though, thanks for joining me in this one, and I'll look forward to seeing you in all the rest of my future videos. Till then, bye-bye for now.